My name is Magnus Shipinski, and I'm here interviewing Mr. Ashby for the Illinois Veteran Project. Hello, Mr. Ashby.
How are you today?
Good, how are you?
Very good, thank you.
So, we're going to ask you a couple questions about your time in the military.
All right.
So, where were you born and when?
I was born in Chicago, January 24th, 1932.
1932.
So that makes me 86. I'll be 86 and 87 next January.
Who were your parents and what were their occupations?
Well, my dad was a truck driver. He drove for a company by the name of Harris Lumber. And many of the garages that you see around Chicago and the suburbs were put up by Harris. He'd deliver the garage, they'd come out and put it up. My mother, she stayed at home. Back then, our mothers all stayed at home.
Do you have any siblings? And if so, what are their names and genders?
I have two brothers. Both are younger. One is 7 years younger. That's Michael. And my youngest brother is 8 years younger than I, Robert. One lives in Denver, Colorado. One lives in New Smyrna, Florida.
What were you doing and where were you living at the time before you entered the service?
I lived on the west side of Chicago, and I was single at that time because I went in the day before or the day after I was 20 years old. So I worked as a meat cutter, and I had already graduated high school. So the neighborhood was mainly German, Polish, Scandinavian.
So that means that you were enlisted?
Yes, I did enlist, right.
Which branch did you pick of the military?
Well, my aunt was very active at the service centers. They had service centers for the fellas, and they could go there and eat, dance, watch a movie, even sleep over. She volunteered at those, and she said, I have a commander up at Glenview that suggests you go in the Navy. Well, I really didn't know what to do, and I said, fine, that's a good suggestion. And I'll tell you, I'm glad I did, because it was a great outfit.
Where did you serve at?
Well, our home port was Long Beach, California. We operated in Japan. I've been in Sasebo, Yokosuka. I've been in Hong Kong. I've been in Singapore. And we made one trip down to Australia to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the Battle of Tarawa. So we got around pretty well.
Do you recall your first days of training?
Yes. We got in late at night, and we slept over, and at about 5 in the morning, we got woke up. We were given a mattress sack. It said, spread it out, get in line, and follow the next man in front of you. And we went down the line, and we received T-shirts and shorts and our Navy uniform and shoes. They asked us what size we wore, and all this went into the bag. From there, we went back to our barracks and sorted it all out into a sea bag.
So what did you feel like when you first were in training?
Well, it was new, that's for sure, and it was a little scary, but I worked in a meat market before I went into service, so I wasn't too shook up about it, but I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
Do you remember your instructors in training?
Honestly, that's a little too far back. Yeah.
Did you receive any specialized training, and if so, what?
Yes. After I completed boot camp, I went out to San Diego, California, and I went through a 9-week commissaryman course. Commissary men are cooks, butchers, or bakers. And when I was done with that and graduated, I had already been a butcher, and I thought, well, I want to learn some more about baking. Mm-hmm. So I got on the ship, my USS Manchester, and they put me in the galley. Well, then the chief needed someone called the Jack of the Dust. The Jack of the Dust was the fellow that put together all the groceries that were used for that day's 3 meals. And I had a little room of my own. I would call down below decks, and the people that were handling all those goods would send them up to my room, and I'd have that all ready for the cooks upstairs. Then I would record everything that was purchased, if you want to refer to it that way, and put the costs in and extend it and come out with a cost of ration daily. What this was what it cost to feed one man one day. And I did that for about 9 months. The chief was getting ready to retire, and he came to me and he said, you've done a pretty fair job for me. If you'd like, I'll put you in any other part of the division that you'd like to be in. And I said, well, I wanted to learn how to bake. Fine, he said, you go in the bake shop. And that was really interesting. We used to make 160 loaves of bread a day, 300 pies if we had pie on the menu, 2,000 cookies. We had 1,240 men on the ship. There was also another mess for the officers, and they had steward's mates that did their cooking. And then there was also a chief's galley, and one of our cooks served in that chief's galley. There were about 40 chiefs on the ship. So we'd work 24 on and 24 off at sea. When we came into port, we'd work a 5-day week and then a 2-day week. So that meant that whenever we were in port and we weren't on duty, we could tour whatever we wanted to do. That was very nice.
What did you like about your time in the Navy?
I met a lot of fellas from all over the country. I learned that there were a lot of different ways of speaking. They were all pretty good men, and they were all looking out for each other. I never forgot that.
What did you do while you were in the service?
We'd spend a tour over in Korea, bombarding the shore. We were right offshore, and whenever our reconnaissance helicopter from the ship was up in the air, they were looking for targets. When they'd find targets, we'd go into battle position, and we'd shell the shore trying to hit those targets. So, and then when we were off duty, we would travel to different countries, calls of port, and that was very nice. I was in Hong Kong, I've been in Tokyo, Sydney, Australia, so Philippines, Manila. We got around pretty well. That was pretty nice.
How did you stay in touch with your family and friends back at home?
We had a regular mail service. The ship, whenever we pulled into port, would drop off the mail, and then that would be carried back to the United States. So many times I received things from home that I appreciated too. When we were on liberty, we could be in civilian clothes, and a lot of times we did that just to relax.
So what would you do for recreation or when you had time off?
Well, we toured the countries for sure. I toured Hong Kong. They have a place called Tiger Balm Gardens that's really kind of scenic, and if you ever get on the TV and troll it, check it out. We went to Tokyo. We went to a store that sold natural and colored pearls, cultured pearls, and I sent things home to my mother, cultured pearls, things like that. Perfume that was made into a kind of a soap and had different flavors, and the prices were pretty inconsiderate, so it was easy to shop. I tried to tour the country that I was in as much as I could. One time in Japan, I got the bright idea that I wanted to rent a motorcycle or a bicycle. So I had to go into the police station to get the permit. And it was kind of different than our police stations, a little scary.
Yeah.
But everything went fine. I made out the paperwork, I got my motorcycle form, and I did a lot of touring of Japan. I climbed Mount Fuji. There are 13 stations there. You start at the bottom, they give you a walking stick, and each time you hit a new station, they put a ribbon on your cane. So unfortunately, I never made it home with that, but I still did it.
When and why did you leave the military?
Well, I served 4 years, and I had a fair job before I went in. And I just didn't think that I wanted to have a single life like in the service, and I thought that it wasn't exactly the best life for a married family, because many times, even though sometimes you get assigned to a base and you can have your family there, many times you're on a ship by yourself and everybody's back at home. So as I say, I had a good job waiting for me, and I got out. I remember the chief officer that ran our division, when he interviewed me about re-upping, he said, you won't get steak when you get on the outside. And I laughed a little, and I said, well, sir, I was a butcher. So,
what did you do once you returned home?
I returned to that job, and I think about 2 years later, there was a young lady that kept on walking down the street with a little boy, and I kind of liked the way she looked. She was a pretty girl, and one day they came into my market to shop, and I called a little boy over, and I said, do you like hot dogs? Oh, sure. So I said, how about a hot dog? And I gave him a raw hot dog. I said, oh, by the way, I said, is that young lady your mother? And he said, no, that's my auntie. So from there, things developed, and we were married in 1957.
How were you perceived when you returned home?
I could see my dad had a lot more respect for me. He knew that I was a man rather than a boy, and he had never been in the service, and I think he admired that fact. Yeah. And my mother, she was just glad to have me home.
Do you still have contact with anyone you served with?
Unfortunately, no. I think there were about, out of, say, 200 men in our draft that reported to the ship, I think about 10 or 12 of us were from Chicago. And what I'm thinking of doing is using my ship book and looking up those names and seeing if they're still around. I did have one from Tennessee that once contacted me, and I told him at the time, if you're ever in Chicago, and I gave him my address, but that it never happened.
Are you still a part of any veterans organizations?
I'm not a veterans organization, but I do volunteer at Hines Hospital, as does my wife. We both have about 2,900 hours. We deliver magazines and paperbacks to all the floors, so that either the fellas or the patients, people have something to read, and it's really a very nice job. Makes me feel really well.
So what have you done since you were in the service?
Well, I've worked at Jewel at the food store, and I was a market manager. Especially in my memories is 400 East Randolph and Lake Point Tower, which were high-rise apartment buildings, and we had beautiful stores in there. There were commissary stores. I handled all prime beef and made my own sales program, and that was a nice 13 years. After time, I just wanted to get back closer to home, and I stepped down as a journeyman and finished up and retired in 1988. So I've been retired quite a long time.
So what are some lifelong lessons you've learned through your military service?
I learned that you want to always look out for the other guy. And I learned that volunteering is good, and I'm very proud that I was in the Navy.
How has your service impacted your opinion on war in the military?
Well, I realize that there are going to be wars. You know, you'd like to think that war would disappear. It's never going to happen. As long as we have human greed, it's going to be there. And we need to protect our country, so consequently, we need people to do it. And I was proud to do it.
What information would you like to give to future generations that may view or hear this interview?
Well, I would encourage them to join the Navy. I not only saw the world, but I also learned how to bake, and it was all a good experience for me, except for the war part.
Is there anything else you would like to add to this interview?
Well, I do remember one incident. Fortunately, I was never hurt. I'm 100%. one day, one afternoon, I was taking the garbage back to the fantail of the ship, which is the back end. And out at sea, normally what you do is you dispose of your garbage that way. You throw it off the back. When I got back toward the main part of the ship, the island that goes up in the air, I heard something that sounded just like somebody threw a handful of gravel at me. And when I looked up, there was a shrapnel hole in the side of the ship up in that tower about so big. Never touched me. So I've been very fortunate. Yeah.
Thank you very much for your time.
You bet. Pleased to do it.
Yep.
And I'd encourage anyone else to do it too that had service. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome.